Okay, we are holding on Daf Tes Amud Beis. Tet Amud Bet. We are at the new Mishnah on the top of the line, and um, even though we're Mizrach Shabbos, and the next Mishnah on Daf Yud Aleph is going to talk about stuff that you cannot do prior to Shabbat, I mean on Erev Shabbat. This Mishnah deals with an everyday situation that you cannot do during the day when Zman Tefillah begins, when it's time to start davening. So let's take a look at this Mishnah. There's a lot to explain. There's a lot of halachas that come out of this sugya. So let us begin. Lo yeshiv adam lifnei hasapar. The person should not sit in front of a barber, samuch lemincha, close to mincha. Usually close means a half hour. It's the way Rashi understands samuch to mean a half hour before. However, in the Rambam, it looks like he's saying kishehagia when it comes to the time of tefillah. So we'll learn like Rashi, which means simply a half hour before mincha. Okay, let me just see if I am see over here. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. I will say. Okay, here's the Mishnah. Right. So samach. The Rashi and the Ran, Samach Mincha Chati Shah Kodim Azman. Rambam Basa Ipsak and Tefillah Perik Vav Halacha Hey. He says Kivan Shegi Azman Mincha Lo Yichanes Lamirchat. So Mash Midvarav Shah Isser Hu Rak Mishal Shegi Hazman Veloy Kodim Lekai, not beforehand. And the Kasam Mishnah explains that Lamincha Kavarasa Shegi Azman Mincha. Karv l'shas hatfilah. So exactly what samach means is the machlokes rishonim, whether it's a half hour like Rashi and the Ran, or whether it means right before the time of tefillah. So far, the Mishnah said again, new Mishnah, Tesamud Beis, Lo yeshiv adam lifnei hasapa. A person should not sit in front of the barber on a regular weekday, samach mincha, prior to mincha, ad palel, until he prays, mincha. A person shouldn't go into the bathhouse or shouldn't go into the tannery. A tannery is where they process hide. They tan the hides to make leather. And basically, it's a business place. A person shouldn't eat a suda. A person shouldn't begin to eat. And he shouldn't sit down to make judgment, like as a dayan in a beit din. Now, he's not supposed to start any of these activities once it's right close to mincha. But if he did start it, ein mafsikin, he does not have to interrupt us. Even though he started not correctly, he wasn't supposed to start, but once he started, we let him continue. And the Mefarshim explain, and the Poskim explain that means he can continue, not a problem, because we're pretty sure he's going to have time later on to pray mincha. But if it's going to be at a time where he's not going to have time to pray mincha, then everyone agrees he has to stop and he has to pray mincha. This is only where he still has time afterwards. Ein mafsikin. And says the Mishnah, mafsikin lekrod kriyat shema. When it comes to kriyat shema, once the time for kriyat shema comes, you have to be mafsik. It's a doraita. The ein mafsikin letfila. When it comes to tefillah, when it comes to prayer, you don't necessarily have to stop as you have time later. It's a durabanan. So therefore, you can continue in whatever you start, even though you started illegally because you weren't supposed to start it. But we won't stop you. So now, the first question we have to deal with is what mincha are we talking about? When we say mincha, there are actually two times in the Jewish calendar on every day that we call mincha. So if you take out your Zmanim app, any app you use, hopefully we're using the Zmanim Yosef app, you'll see they have two minchas. They have a mincha gedola and a mincha kitana. There's also something called plaga mincha, which we're not going to get into today. But there's something called mincha gedola and mincha kitana. Why is it called mincha gedola? Why is it called mincha kitana? What is mincha gedola? What is mincha kitana? And what mincha does our Mishnah refer to? So let's read the words of the Gemara and we'll explain. Hey, samuch lemincha. This right before mincha, whether it's a half hour according to Rashi and the Ran, or right before according to the Rambam. Ilema umincha gedayla. Are we saying we can't do any of these activities before mincha gedayla? And am I loy? And why not? Mincha gedayla. So here we go. Here's the explanation. Why is it called mincha gedayla? Mincha ketana. Let's explain it outside. All this can be found in note 8 in the article, or most of this. So there was a carbon. The carbon was called the carbon atomid. It was the constant carbon that brought every day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And they have to be brought, the second one has to be brought ben ha'arbaim, between the darkenings. Between the darkenings. What darkenings? It has to be after Hatzot, when after midday, the sun starts to get somewhat darker. It's on its descent. It's going to come down soon, right? And before the darkening of night. So the Talmud Shel Ben Ha'arbaim, the everyday carbon that's brought Ben Ha'arbaim, between the darkenings, has to happen after Chatzot. Now, in order to allow for human error exactly when Chatzot is, they would wait a half hour. And that is what's called Mincha Gedola. That's the earliest time that they can bring the Talmud Shel Ben Ha'arbaim, a half hour after Chatzot. So anytime you know what Chatzot is, a half hour later is Mincha Gedola. Okay? The time is calculated as 30 regular minutes after Chatzot. That's the way we usually calculate it. The Zmani Yosef, he says that when the hours are longer, they will use the Sha'od Zmaniyot minutes, and you should daven a little bit later. So therefore, and the Zman I'm looking today, really, Chatzot is 12:53. So really, 1:23 is already Chatzot, is Mincha Gedolah. He says, but since today is a very long day, he adds more time. So let's use, for our example, for all intents and purposes, what we will call a halachic perfect day for Zmanim, for Sha'od Zmaniyot. The sun goes up at 6, the sun goes down at 6. 12 o'clock is Chatzot. Half hour later, 12:30, that is Mincha Gedolah. All right, in our setup of the day of 6 to 6. Mincha Gedolah is at 12:30. That's when a person can pray. However, the Chachamim want us to pray later. They don't really want us to pray. You could pray Mincha Gedolah, and in Yeshivot they do, because, of different reasons and issues. And it's a very big minhag, and should be kept. Those who pray Mincha Gedolah. However, for the regular people, you want to pray Mincha Ketana. Mincha Ketana is 3.5 hours after Hatzot. So Hatzot in our perfect day is 12. So 3:30 is Mincha Ketana. In our day today, if you take a look at the app, it is at 5:13 because they're using Sha'od Zmaniyot. And it's basically 9.5 hours, Sha'od Zmaniyot, seasonal hours, after the start of the day. So 3.5 hours after Chatzot, which is 9.5 hours from the start of the day. And that's the Mincha Ketana. And that's usually when they actually brought the Talmid Shel Ben Ha'arbaim. Therefore, they want you to pray Mincha around that time, around Mincha Ketana. There is another teaching, I believe, in Masechet Berachot, that says you should pray Mincha with the rays of the sun, which is more towards sunset. And that's what which many of us do. We pray Mincha right before Shkia, and that follows that De'ah. However, there is a yesod to pray after Mincha Ketana, as that's the time that the Korban would be brought. So this is now the Gemara's question. Hi, this Samach Mincha, the Mishnah says you can't do anything. If you say it's Mincha Gedayla, which is a half hour after Chatzot, why can't I? Why can't I take a haircut? Why can't I eat something? Why can't I go to the shower? Why can't I go to the job? I have so much time. Shows the Yom Tova. I have so much day. I have so much time during the day. Man, the Mishnah must mean that it's talking about Mincha Ketana. 3.5 hours after Chatzon. Now you have 2.5 hours left until sunset, and it's a short period of time for Mincha. Therefore, don't start those things there. Okay, so the first answer to which mincha we're talking about is the Gemara's answer that is talking about mincha kitana and not mincha gedolah. Now, the Gemara says, if you say this is true, and that's the way to understand the Mishnah, what did the Mishnah say? If he starts, you don't stop him, right? If he starts a meal at mincha kitana, you don't stop him. Is that true? But Nema, Tiyet Tiyuf to the Rishu ben Levi. It's going to be a reputation to Rishu ben Levi. Rishu ben Levi said, once Tfilat Mincha starts, Asr Adam Sheyitom Kilum. He's not allowed to taste anything. According to Rishu ben Levi, you cannot even taste anything, let alone start a Suda. So how can our Mishnah mean, if Rabbi Shimon Levi's statement is true, how can our Mishnah mean mincha kitana? You tell me I can start the meal, I don't have to finish it. I don't have to stop it, right? And according to Shimon Levi, you're not allowed to even taste anything at that time. Now, the truth is, well, according to the Gemara itself, Masechet Berachot tells us that we don't follow Rabbi Shua ben Levi's stock in this area. So, but for whatever reason, the Gemara attempts to answer this question of the steer of Shua ben Levi. And the Gemara says, lie. I'll tell you. Really, the Mishnah should be understood talking about Mincha Gedolah. And what about the whole day? I'll tell you what's the problem. Even though he has the whole day, it has the next 5.5 hours to pray Mincha. But you know what's going to be? We're talking about Uvit Poret Ben El Asa, the haircut of Ben El Asa. El Asa was the son-in-law of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and he wanted to demonstrate the haircut of the Kohen Gadol, which was a haircut. The tip of one hair was next to the base of another. It was a special type of haircut, and it took a whole day to do. So when they said you can't do a haircut, they're talking about a whole day affair. That's the one you cannot go. But lo merchat, we say don't go to the shower. The kula mills of the merchat. It means the entire merchat, the whole, the fully loaded, the full bathhouse experience. The hot water, the cold water, the sauna, the jet stream, the spa, all the parts of it. Oh, okay, that makes sense why you shouldn't do it. Levorsky Gedolah, big business area with a lot of product there. It's going to get lost in there. It's all these things that are going to make you get involved and stay involved. And don't eat. Which one? Suda Gedolah. I'm talking about a Suda Gedolah. That's what you can't. You can't start a wedding meal or a brit or meal without first praying mincha, because you're going to get lost in the meal. B'tchilat din, or starting a new judgment case, because you're going to get very involved. So we have now our second answer. The Mishnah is talking about mincha gedolah, but only about a suda gedolah, or big things that tend to go on, and therefore we are worried. But now the Gemara gives its third answer. Ravacha Bar Yaakov Amar Lo'ilam Betis Poret Didan. No, a regular haircut, 15 minutes, whatever it takes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something small. Lechatchila Amaylo Yeshiv, but still lechatchila you shouldn't sit for a haircut, even in Chagidola, even if it's a regular haircut. Why? Gzeda Shema Yishav and Hazug. Perhaps the scissor that the barber is using will break, and he doesn't have backup tools. And you're not going to walk out with a half a haircut, and you're going to stay there till he figures it out. And a whole day can pass, and not to the shower house, not to the bathhouse. And even lahazeh b'alman, he just goes for the sweating, the sauna part, the steam bath. Why? Why not? It's just something small period of time. Perhaps he'll become weak. All right, and then he won't be able to pray. He'll faint. Just to go to the business place just to see. Why shouldn't he just go see? Perhaps he'll see some of his product getting ruined, and he's going to try to save it and fix it. And therefore, he'll get lost into it now. So it's all on there's a chance that something might go wrong. Why can't I even start something small? Maybe, I'll start with one chip and then I'll end the whole bag, and then I'll move on to the next bag of chips or whatever it is. And not for judgment. Big Martin, even if it's just the end of the judgment. Why shouldn't I start it? Perhaps he will, what's it called? See a new light in the case, a new reason, new something, and start all over. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, Mincha Gedola, and you can't do anything small because maybe something big will happen. So we had here three answers to the Gemara, just to review. The first answer was the Mishnah is talking only about Mincha Ketana, not Mincha Gedola. Then, because of his statement, Shabbat Levi, the Gemara decided to answer that perhaps it's Mincha Gedola only by big things, like the Suda Gedola, like a special haircut, and like that. And then Rav Acha Bar Yaakov gave the answer, no. Mincha Gedola, even small thing, because maybe something will happen. What do we do? So, we have to understand that Rishonim have a machoket. Who do we paskin like? The Baal HaMaor says we paskin like the first answer in the Gemara, that it's talking only about Mincha Ketana, and it tells you why. He says the Baal HaMaor says because we know Rabbi Shimon Levi, we don't take his opinion into account. The Gemara and Daf Chav Ches and Bracha says no, not Rabbi Shimon Levi. So therefore, the answer is like the first answer in the Gemara. Tosafot on our page. Tosafot says the halacha is like the second answer. The halacha is like the second answer. And he says because that is Rav Ashi. That's the stam answer in the Gemara. Once he asked the question, you answered it. And that was the stam answer, and that was Rav Ashi. And the halacha is like Rav Ashi. Therefore, you cannot start something big by Mincha Gedol. Something small, you could start. And the Rif says the last answer in the Gemara is Rav Acha Bar Yaakov's answer, which is you can't start something even small. You can't start something even small by Mincha Gedola. Well, halacha, the Shulchan Aruch goes with the Rif. And the Shulchan Aruch says that one can not start anything when it is time for Mincha Gedolah. I'll read you the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says, Lo Yeshav Adam Yistaper Samach LeMincha Ad She'itpala V'Leichanes LeMerchat V'Lendevarsiki V'Loi L'Din V'Loi Lecha Afilu Suda Ketana Samach LeMincha Gedolah. Before Mincha Gedolah. Who does he go with? Shulchan Aruch is going with the Rif and others who rule strictly. However, says the Shulchan Aruch, just finishing the Shulchan Aruch because we did see this already. I already mentioned it. If he started any of these, even though he started a Beisur, you allow him to continue. You don't have to stop him. That's as long as he has time to still pray mincha afterwards. If he doesn't have time afterwards to pray, meaning it's right before the end of the day, then he has to stop immediately. Okay, so everything like we explained. The Ramah comes and says, listen, there are those who argue with this riff. There are others who say that the issue is only only a Suda Gedola by Mincha Gedola, like the Stam answer. And then he says there are some that say the whole issue is just Mincha Ketana. Okay, is the problem. But then he says, Mihu b'Suda Gedola yesh lahachmer afilu samach l'mincha Gedola. The first he says you have what to you have what to rely on to be lenient, and then he says no, you should be machmer. So the Lamar said it looks like we need to be machmer here. That we shouldn't be eating any meal, we shouldn't be taking a haircut, we shouldn't be going involved in business once it's already mincha gedola or chas yisha before mincha gedola. So once it's already chatzot, because it's time to pray. And the Shulchan Aruch goes with anything, even small stuff that might turn into big things, that you should not start once it's already time for mincha. So what does everybody pretty much rely on that we all do many things before it's time to pray mincha. So there's a couple of heterim that people use. Number one, if I have a set time of tefillah, this is the Aruch HaShulchan of the mitzvah the minyan. If he plays in a minyan, and if he what's it called, and he davens there every day, and he's always there, and he knows to go, and that's the standard. So, so therefore, he has what to rely on. Says the Aruch HaShulchan that if he goes to a steady minyan and he prays on a daily basis, and he's relied upon to go there and be there, and he's part of it, so then he has what to rely on. He can do these different tasks during the day. Alichot Shlomo and others deal with this, and this is also the Ben Ish Chai brings this as well. Is if you put up shomrim, people to remind you that you have to pray mincha. So if there are people who remind you to have to pray mincha, so then you can do these other activities before once it's already mincha get a lot of time, because people are going to remind you. And there are those who even say you can use an alarm clock. Basically, you can put an alarm on your phone. Don't forget to daven mincha, right, for mincha time. And then if a person has this shmirah, this reminders, and stuff like that, person can rely on this. So you have room to be makel. Number one, you have the Ramah that says you have Yesh Chokim. We have the Balamor and the Tosafot's opinions. We also have the opinion of if I have a steady minion. We also have if someone's going to remind me, right, or my own alarm clock. So with these type of things, we have permission, so to speak, to start these activities. In fact, the Magen Avraham brings down that according to Achabar Yaakov, we're worried that the barber's tool might break. He says, so now when the barber has backup tools, most of our barbers have backup tools, and therefore it shouldn't be a problem to take a haircut beforehand, right? Because maybe, right? You said the whole thing is maybe he's going to break. Well, maybe now he has backup tools. Not a problem. Although the Ben Ish Chai does bring, based on Kabbalistic opinions, that a person should never take a haircut after Chatzot. But the Minchat Elazar and others say that's a mistake in the understanding of the Arizal. And Ktsaitz Shulchan brings down that today people take haircuts even by Mincha Ketana. And maybe that it's simple haircuts, that the tools are modernized. And it says people do it. No one says anything about it. The Meiri gives another heter for certain activities. The Meiri said, listen, look in this Mishnah. In all the activities in the Mishnah, we're dealing with stuff that she'en regilot asitan lechatzian, that you don't do them in halves, you don't interrupt. And so therefore he says, anything, v'chein kol kiyat v'elu, al tefira v'ksiva v'shar dvarim she'adam ragil v'histalek mehem lechatzi shir, matchel u'shagir zman tefila mafsek. He says, these stop taking the haircut, going to the shower. People don't soak themselves up and then walk out and go for mincha. People don't take a half a haircut and then say, oh, I gotta go pray. These are all things that are uninterruptible. Therefore, don't start them beforehand. It says in Meiri, if you have stuff that are interruptible, or writing a letter, or doing something like that, which is sewing or things like that, that one usually does interrupt, the Meiri gives heterim to start that because it's something that is interruptible. And we'll end finally with a Panini halacha who brings this all the halachot involved in this understanding together. One may not start work that will be difficult to stop in the middle, and will likely continue past the end of the time to pray. Likewise, you may not begin to work that might create a problem, which in order to fix it would require continuing past the final time to pray. I would say an example of this is you deciding to fix your washing machine, right? If something goes wrong, you're going to be there all day. One may not shop if the shopping may last until after the final time to pray. Similarly, one may not swim in a pool where there's concern that he might remain there until the time to pray ends. However, in a situation in which there's no concern that he will forget to recite mincha, these activities are permitted. For instance, a person is permitted to start any type of work if he's in a place where he will be called to pray mincha. People will call him, hey, you got to go mincha. Similarly, one is allowed to begin all kinds of work when he knows that the workplace will close before mincha time. it's permissible to shop in a place where they will call people to pray mincha, right? Sometimes you're in a bingo or something like that, and they say mincha, mincha, and aisle this, right? So if you know that's going to happen, then you can do it. Or want to ask his friend to remind him to pray mincha. You in a reminder, or you put an alarm. The pool closes at a time that you're going to be time to pray mincha, or you swim only at a certain time, and there's plenty of time later. Or you have a steady minyan. There's plenty of what to rely on to start different activities. I have to tell you that in the world of Judaism, there's a group that are very, very always concerned about mincha, which is a very appropriate thing. We'll see again. We'll talk about that actually a little bit later. The Gemara says the person should be agitated to figure out where he's praying mincha and when, because sometimes the whole, you're busy, you're away, you're at work, and you don't have mincha. The person has to make it his business to find the mincha minyan. Okay, before let's go on. That's the halacha from that sugya. Let's move on to the next piece. Me'ematai hatchalat tisporet. When does the haircut begin? At what point can I say a haircut began? That we said if he begins it, he doesn't have to stop. At what point? Rabbi Ravin says, Mishianiach ma'ofenet shel sapiran al birkav. When one puts a barber's cloth on his lap. Basically, the barber thing they put on you so your hair doesn't go on you, still goes on you. But anyway, then when they put that on, that is the start of the haircut. It's not actually started working on your hair yet. Just once you put the apron on you, that's it. What's considered the beginning of the bathhouse that you don't have to interrupt afterwards? Once he starts removing his cloth, whether it's his headgear or his other clothing, whatever it is, once he starts to undress, he can continue. And when is the beginning of the bursiki, going into the tannery, to the workplace? When one ties his sleeve between his shoulders so they shouldn't get dirty, so when he starts dressing up for his job, that's already considered as if he started and he doesn't have to stop. And when it's considered starting the meal, do I have to actually put something in my mouth or not? So Rav says, Mishitol Yadav. Once a person washes his hand for food. Once he unfastens his belt. They're not arguing. This is them and this is us. Meaning it's either Bava or Eretz Yisrael, depending where you are. It's machloket which one did what, but one of them put very tight belts, which means when you time to eat, you couldn't eat like that. You had to open your belt. That was the beginning of their seudah. The other ones didn't have tight belts, so when they washed their hands, whether for until they die, whether for hygiene, whatever it was, they washed their hands. That was Mishiotom, probably means dying though. That means they started the seudah, and you don't have to stop. Okay. There's an interesting Yerucham Levovitz that deals with, big deal. The guy opened his belt, put his belt back on, go daven. You're supposed to daven. You weren't supposed to take off your belt. Why does the why does the halacha is that if you open his belt, you let him eat, you don't stop him? So instead of Yerucham, because we have to realize people are not pieces of wood. Once a person gets into something, you have to have sensitivity to it. He wants to eat. He started to eat. You can't just stop him. Right? You have to have a sensitivity. The halacha allows him now, even though he did it illegally. Halacha allows him. You don't tell him, get up, you. No. There's a certain sensitivity that we allow him to continue to eat. Okay, now, the next question, Amar Abaya. Abaya wants to deal with as follows. Now, we said, according to what we're learning, a person is supposed to pray mincha, and you start to eat, we let him continue to eat. Amar Abaya. Abaya said a statement. Hane Havrin Bavle. Our Babylonian colleagues. Lemanda Amar Tfilat Arvit Rashut. According to the one who says Tfilat Arvit Rashut, right? It's Machloket, Masechet Berachot, Tfilat Arvit, the evening prayer. Is it a reshut or is it a chovah? Do you have to, or it's an elective? We hold that it's an elective, but later on it became a minhag of Klal Yisrael, therefore it's treated as an obligation today. The person has to pray Arvit. But Mikadin, it's an elective. Now, Kiven Dishra le Hemiyaneh. Once he took off his belt, Lo Matrichan le. We do not trouble him to go pray. So Abaya's statement was, since Arvit is a reshut, if the guy took off his belt, we don't force him to go pray, let him eat, and then you pray afterwards. Now, this statement of Tfilat Avit is Rashut, you can keep your belt, you can keep your belt off and eat, implies that if Tfilat Avit is a Chovah, Ulman da Amar Chovah, Matrichale. The implication is we would bother him. Close up your belt and go daven. Rabbi said, since Mincha is a Rashut, if you took off your belt, you can keep it off and you can continue to eat. Meaning that if it's a Chovah, and you have to put on your belt and go daven. But one second. For our Mishnah, Ba'atfilat Mincha. The Kuli Ama Chovahi. According to everybody, nobody says Mincha is not a Chovah. Everyone holds it's an obligation. So if it's an obligation, if he started, he doesn't have to stop. It means if he took off his belt, he doesn't have to stop. So why does the Bible hold that if Arvit is a Chovah, you have to put on your belt? And Mincha is a Chovah, you don't have to put back your belt and daven? Why would be the distinction between Mincha and Arvit? So, Hatam. So, one, we're going to have two answers. Hatam, there, our Mishnah talks about Loi Shchicha Shichrut, because by lunchtime, most people are not getting drunk. So then he'll have time to daven afterwards and be able to daven. But at night, in the nighttime, Shecha Shichrut, people do get drunk. And when they get drunk, they're not able to daven anymore. So therefore, and they'll fall asleep and you won't go to daven at all. So therefore, the night meal, if you hold it to chovah, you cannot eat your meal because you're going to drink and you're going to drink good and you're going to get drunk. And therefore, we don't let you start the meal. But the day meal, you don't get drunk. The Tosfos here on the page, Tosfos Hassam, he says, 1 second. Didn't we say that when it comes to the Siyat Kapayim, when it comes to Duchening, the Kohen is not allowed to Duchen at Mincha time? Why? Because we're worried that he drank. Right? In the morning he didn't drink, but in the Mincha time he drank already. So we do drink at Mincha time. So why you say Lo Shecha Shichrut? So it says Tosfot, it depends. You have to understand what it means. A Kohen is not allowed to Duchen if he drank a revi'it of alcohol. A revi'it of wine. So if he drank 2.7 ounces, 3 ounces, right? 2.7, 3 ounces, that's already a revi'it. And as such, he's not allowed to Duchen anymore. Are you allowed to daven? It's not considered drunkenness. Okay? Shechros Gemura Shemachmaseya Yavset Tefillah. Ein Shechicha Ela Belayla. And says Tosfot, this real drunkenness and the forgetfulness and the daven, that's only nighttime. So during the day, when it says you don't get drunk, that's going for drunk for tefillah, right? But for the Siyat Kapayim, that you're already not allowed to be duchening. Nami, I'll give you another answer. Ve'mincha kivan de kvi'a la zimna. Since mincha has a very set time, it has a time. It's the middle of the day, and it's from Hatzot, half hour Hatzot after Hatzot, so from 12:30 to 6, in the day that we set up as being 6 to 6. You have 5.5 hours to pray mincha. It's a very fixed time. Arvit, so mincha the kvi'al mirtat lemifsha. One will be anxious and he will not come to be negligent. Arvit, kivan de kula leila zman arvit, lo mirtat va'ata lemifsha. One will not be anxious because he says, listen, I have from 6 o'clock till 6 o'clock. I have from 6 o'clock tonight till 6 o'clock in the morning. And 12 hours to daven. It's okay. So therefore, I'll take it easy. Oh, because you can take it easy. Therefore, if you start to eat, we don't let you eat. You have to stop. But for mincha, where you have only 5.5 hours, you're going to be worried. So therefore, even if you start eating, you'll make sure to pray mincha. Like I was saying before, like certain Jews in the Litvish world, they're very careful when it comes to mincha. Mincha, already hours before Shkia, they're worried. When we're going to pray mincha, we're going to get mincha. And they that's a normal Jewish reaction. Because you got to be worried. Whereas mincha, I got only 5.5 hours to pray mincha. I got to make sure it happens. Then the Gemara asks, Matkif law Rav Sheshet. Sheshet says, what's this big deal of putting back the belt? We talked about sensitivity from Rabbi Yochanan, but this is Rav Sheshet's question. What's the big deal? Put on your belt, go down it. And furthermore, let him go down without his belt. The Gemara says, no, without his belt, Israel. Prepare to meet your God, O Israel. Pasuk in Amos that tells us a person may not pray without his belt. Shulchan Aruch rules that one should wear a belt during prayer. The Mishnah Berurah states this requirement applies only to one who wear a belt the entire day. And we already saw many times from different sources, the Machzor Vitri and others, who say that today, where our undergarments and pants, whatever we wear, have like an elastic that separates between the erva, between the nakedness and the heart, so that already works as a belt. However, there is still an inyan of wearing a special belt for tefillah. The Hasidim have what's called a gartel. Chamabaja says that if someone wants to wear a gartel, but he knows his father is not going to approve of it, not with the minhag, they never wore it, he should not wear it. Shouldn't become a hasid on someone else's expense if they don't like it and what you're doing. And Lamasa, we wear a belt on our pants. We have elastics on our undergarments, and as such, that is sufficient. Let's read the next Gemara, and then we'll do a little halacha, and then we will end over here. Rava bar Rav Huna, Rame Puzmike. Yes, the question at the end. Rava bar Rav Huna, Rame Puzmike umitzali. Rava bar Rav Huna would put on fine footwear and pray. Amar, he said, you have to wear nice shoes. Hikon likrat elokecha Israel. Prepare yourself for greeting Hashem. The Rambam says it. The fairish person should not wear, should not go barefoot to daven. Person shouldn't daven just in socks. Person should put on shoes. But then the Rambam says, and Lach Lamaisa, a lot of these things deal with this final criteria, which is, what is the minhag today when you meet important people and special dignitaries and special people? How you dress to meet them would be the standard for tefillah. So today, unfortunately, people go to visit presidents in shorts and without socks and in slippers and Crocs. And so those become now permissible to pray in me'ikar hadin. Like we said on Shabbat, but a person has to remember he's going to visit Hashem. And as such, Melech Machem Lachim requires us to behave a little bit better. And people should come to the shul dressed more appropriate, even in the summer and stuff like that. They should have a special clothing special for prayer. In the yeshiva world, B'nai Yeshiva and B'nai Torah who go to Haredi Yeshivot, their uniform for davening is a hat and jacket. And they should have this uniform both in and out of yeshiva. If that is their uniform in yeshiva, it should be always for tefillah, they should be using a hat and jacket. At a minimum, the Al-Qajosi says a person can daven without a hat if his yarmulke is big enough that it covers most of his head, and that means it can be seen from every side. If I look from this side to that side, I can see the yarmulke. That would be enough. But even as such, a person should have a special jacket that he puts on just for, he puts on during tefillah. He dresses at least in clean, refined clothing, especially on Shabbat when it's a more happy day, special day, and you're not going to work and stuff like that. A person should make it his business, put on a suit, put on a tie, put on a shirt, whatever his minhag of his place is to show respect to Shabbat. Person needs to do that. It's part of Hikol Nikrat Elokecha Israel. Rava Shade Gilime Uchbachar Yadei Umetzale. Rava would cast off his cloak. Rava, on the other hand, would take off his cloak. And he would clasp his hands and pray. He said, I stand like a servant in front of his master. I'm not going to wear fancy clothing. I'm going to stand like an abbot. I saw Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana, when there was a problem in the world and he was davening for help, took off his cloak, his fancy cloak, he put his hands together, and he prayed like a slave. I'm like a servant before his master. Kiika Shaloma, when there was shalom in the world, Lavish, Umitkase, Umitate, Umitzale, he would dress, cover, and wrap himself, and put himself together in a nice way. Amar Hikoin, the Krat Elokecha Yisrael, reading Hashem, so I got to dress properly. In fact, the minhag by the Timanim is to always wear a talit by every tefillah, and that is like their special garment that they are putting on for tefillah. So that is a very important halachot that comes here, that a person needs to dress properly for tefillah. Now, if he doesn't have the proper garments, he doesn't have his special jacket or his hat or whatever it is, of course he should pray, as long as he's wearing clothing and refined clothing. Hopefully, if he's a plumber or stuff like that, he should have on him an extra shirt or something that he can switch into or switch out to. This way he can come pray. But even if then he doesn't have it, he should pray. You don't want to miss Zman Tefillah because of that. But it is an inyan and it is a halacha that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch in 91 and 98 and 32 and other places that person should have special clothing, or at least clean clothing, for tefillah. Okay, we'll take the question. Yeah.
General questions. 2 questions are related. Basically, are we allowed